Honestly, I'm just as surprised as the rest of you to see this game's review score so divided. Pokemon Legends ZA is in an odd spot, criticized to oblivion for its business practices, production value, and more, meanwhile praised for? Well, I don't really know exactly. It's got Pikachu, surely that's why. But amid the chaos of war, I want to do one thing: set things straight. With a full-blown analysis of the game, focusing of course on the gameplay since that's the most important part, to see, if the game itself is good, not what it stands for or any of that other nonsense. Yes, gamers, today I'm going to do the impossible and give it to you straight both ways, the good and the bad. As the guy responsible for trashing the previous Pokemon Legends game through analysis, walk back the idea a bit because I might not have gotten it, before quadrupling down because I simply let the game speak for itself. Yeah, as that guy, I'm really glad for one thing with ZA. This game being an arguable step up from Arceus. Yes, this is where I stand, even if it's potentially a small step forward. And now with the intro wrapped up, I'm going to show you how, despite this game's baffling attempts to shoot itself in the foot, as this game right here is one of the most confusing games I've ever played, spoilers and all. How good is it? Let's find out. Cracking open our overworld gameplay sections, we'll start with the setting of Lumio City. Yes, just the city, since the region of Kalos might have just been asking for too much. Here we get a pretty daring piece of game design where everything is set in a single city. As for what that means in a play space speak, it's a bit limiting, as most of the game is stuck in this massive circle-shaped sandbox, which ends up leading to significantly more restrictions in terms of navigation, featuring way too much flat terrain, and unfortunately a lack of environmental variety, unless we start talking about the very small supply of side areas tucked away in their own maps. From just the streets, things are very forgettable outside of the high traffic areas, as everything looks too samey, needing a bit of help. Thankfully though, the streets aren't all we have, as verticality is something that finally gets to be played with a bit to some troubling results. In a free roam sense, just going high and seeing where you can go might have its charm, but needing to follow the rooftops for progressing plot is where things fall flat, as the path required to reach your objective just has a bad habit of not being telegraphed very well, potentially expanding over many roofs and seemingly optional scaffolding, just feeling like a maze in order to find the only possible path forward in a game with incredibly limited movement options. So with our framework, let's ask a relevant question. Is there even a reason to explore? Well, we've got a few actually. Here we have the obligatory side quest that really doesn't need any elaboration. We have the Mega Shards as a collectible currency in the lineup of Overworld interactables, and most importantly the pseudo collectathon that is collecting the colorful screws around the world, typically tied to attempted parkour sections, with 80 required to get all of the permanent rewards tied to them. You could say things are up with pain points, although our ability to move around exemplifies those pain receptors quite a bit, as the perfect pivot to trainer gameplay. As following the Legends formula, we once again have a significantly larger focus on the trainer's contributions to both battle and exploration. As for now, the latter. In traversal speak, our ability to actually explore the world is a bit limited. We've of course got the return of crouching for attempted stealth-based gameplay, rolling as a means to get around faster and avoid various forms of danger, alongside sprinting, but unlike Legends Arceus, we actually have a noticeable speed boost here, which outside of basic ball throwing, that really covers what we can do. Outside of climbing up various compatible terrain automatically, just from holding forward, with an inability to jump. In fact, gaining height is actually really troublesome because of the lack of any form of ride Pokemon in this game, as we have nothing to give us a massive ground speed boost, hell, not even the roller skates that defined the previous Kalos game. Absolutely no water travel, like good lord, you can't even walk through it. But the big things we lack is any form of wall climbing, which would revolutionize exploration due to how much this game values verticality, and a lack of proper flight or gliding that ends up making long treks of traveling forward or accessing shortcuts pretty difficult. Technically, there is a glide feature that gets unlocked with story progress, but it's not exactly reliable, as it's only usable midair and only really slingshots you upward in a means that helps you distance-wise very briefly, not helping at all in terms of height. Overall, this makes the game's ground movement across this compact, but still very dense world pretty tough through the lack of speed options alongside it just kinda being a mess. Outside of movement, the trainer still has gameplay niches that persist with differences from the last Legends game, particularly addressing death, as first fall damage is just gone entirely, completely cutting out on probably the most common means of death. If this wasn't putting dying on the back burner, however, maybe death just losing all shreds of punishment might hit the spot, as now when you die, there is no loss of items at all, only really costing you your time running back. Now now allowing a new approach called not playing as optimally as possible, or at the very least, simply accepting your fate. That part's important because not just catching, but even stealth is dumbed down quite a bit. Where Legends Arceus had all those quirky items give you approaches to snagging Pokemon, here, all you have is Pokeballs and nothing else. This decision hinders your ability to sneak up on wild mons to backstrike them, handicaps your ability to sneak past wild Pokemon without drawing aggro, and makes ambushing trainers less reliable too, being an unfortunate change that neuters overworld catching into the ground and even makes stealth-based gameplay go from promising to an endangered concept, really hampering the overworld's gameplay depth. Attempting to salvage that, however, is your Pokemon in the overworld, since they actually do have non-battling implications. In fact, the big thing they do is actually find a decent compromise to the HM feature of old, because apparently removing them wasn't good enough. As we've already seen with the lack of ride mounts, the mons themselves are not rideable. Instead, they interact with the obstacles around the world in a much better way than just having a Rock Smash HM could provide. As here, we've got several interactables around the world. Some can eat any attack to activate some effects, but others are hurdles waiting to be destroyed, like toxic waste, boulders, and brambles. Just for an example, all collapse to attacks through their typing or category, meaning yeah, while you do need some attacks on your mons to get past these obstacles, who needs to carry specifically Rock Smash at all times when plenty of stronger attacks can do the job instead, with similar logic applying to the other hazards as well, fixing the biggest issue of some HMs prior, being inflexible, as now you've just got a larger variety of options to conquer these problems, where EXP may even be granted, which outside of starting battles basically covers your overworld gameplay, meaning now the remaining features. First for that will be the disappointment of a map. With a positive first, it's really nice to have a visible minimap when running around, since this world really just lacks notable landmarks and visual diversity among many of its areas. It really makes knowing where you are quite helpful. Alongside the minimap itself, having that useful ring around it that actually keeps track of the progress in the current day-night cycle. Although it's a shame, as its usefulness unfortunately does have a cap, with the rooftops struggling in terms of how to get up there. The main perpetrators being a lack of ladders or even the scaffolding parkour courses, which really makes getting into these areas inaccessible from just the ground, which obviously isn't ideal. Although it's odd, as the holovators actually are marked on the map, making an even further mess of rooftop travel, since entire pathways are just hidden on the ground just because. If that wasn't enough, the fact you only have one pin will have disastrous consequences for those needing to balance many things of note on their map. Positives do exist, of course. Unlike Legends Arceus, this world actually does have a nice supply of fast travel points, and if you really want to dive into side quests, the map having notifications to start these quests is nothing short of fantastic, although that just about cuts it for the map. A great feature, while useful, does have its limitations that sadly make it a bit frustrating to use. Which finally leaves us with the most important part of the game, the day-night cycle. Yeah, instead of just being a cosmetic change that also changes the wild encounter variety across the world and potential timing for evolutions, it does all of that obviously, but more, because as new features we have the wild and battle zones as integral components to the game. Essentially, the wild zones are just numbered areas like routes that grow in count, taking over other parts of the game as the plot progresses. Outside of hosting wild encounters, not even exclusively mind you, they don't really end up doing too much, especially as they're still active during nighttime, which is where the battle zones come in. Only active at night, these end up serving as the battling counterpart to wild Pokemon as they host trainer battles and shut down the shops in the vicinity. But wow, this place is not simple at all to explain, as this game's main progression system is built on ranks of some kind. These ranks help build up the pools of trainers you get to battle in the battle zones, unfortunately in a repetitive supply that fills out the several battle zones that can appear at night. Your goal is to just do battles in order to progress to get tickets, enabling boss battles to potentially rank up. Of course, since we're basically in feature territory, there's a means to gain even more score through randomly generating cards by meeting their conditions in battle. Outside of that, there's really not much else to it. It's just battle again, and again to progress, and eventually, once night ends, get a cash payout, one that gets greater from winning more battles or collecting medals. All of this lasts during nighttime 16-minute cycles before being forced back to day for 32 minutes without trainer battles available. While that's what the day-night cycle gives us, the transition between the times is less than desirable, and the big deal here, as every single time a time transition happens, it's not as simple as just a lighting change, but instead a loading screen followed by an unskippable cutscene followed by another loading screen, just eating time for breakfast. While the transition from night to day can be helpful since it's when your money is given out, it stops being helpful when it's the third interruption in a row for 0 rewards, because of course you didn't even go into the battle zone, and there's no way to get around this nonsense. And the day to night transition is sometimes helpful with spotting the battle zone, although not really, since most of the areas look the exact same with only one really being distinct. Although once you hit post game, it just stops stops being helpful entirely with multiple battle zones active at once, to harass you for days on end, which leaves us with a mechanic that forces the change with the benches. Simply stopping by any of these will allow you to skip to the next part of the day-night cycle instantly, just in case you need to access either, without waiting real time, which technically does have an issue, with the benches themselves just being all over the place, which makes finding them a bit hard if you're just running around. The technicality in question being that a Pokemon Center just ends up having one of these at their lack of a door always. So if you're too lazy to fast travel to one for fear of backtracking to where you were, instead hunting for a bench, things can just be a bit of a hassle. Where we're done. At the end, setting the game in a single city is honestly a nice attempt to mix up the level design of a game. Sadly though, this is an uphill challenge that the game struggles to handle. Thankfully though, not all battles for this game are uphill, as when we roll into the battling section, the challenge of one-upping the previous Pokemon Legends game becomes an utter walk in the park. Dropping feet first into the gameplay section, take what disaster you remember the Legends Arceus battle system to be, and just simply throw it out, because thankfully, ZA gives a brand new battle system entirely. One that, as you'll see, lacks a bit in terms of substance, but at least isn't completely miserable to play. The first thing that stands out about battle is the fact that it's not even turn-based, but rather real-time. As the battle starts, both sides can just attack each other at the same time, as you have to lock onto a target with the press and hold of a trigger, where once locked on, your moves appear tied to each of the system's lettered buttons. Simply use the associated move, which will go immediately, and then wait for a cooldown with a determined amount of time, where you can't use it, while you use your other attacks to hopefully beat the foes. That's the bare bones basics about the new battling system. But of course, we want the in-depth look and explanation. So first, we'll actually look at the battle state itself, as things are a bit weird. Because you remember how in basically every other game prior, as battles actually need their own proper transition to even enter? Well, it's a bit weird to enter and exit here. As with the Wild Mons first, you're kind of already in battle with them, as there's no transition at all, in or out of battle, as the use for your mons in the overworld isn't just for breaking boulders, it's also where most of the battling is. Since with wild Pokemon, you just walk up with a mon out, lock on, and simply fight, where the battle ends from defeating all the agitated foes, potentially catching them, now with the ability to be locked out of catching if you fail enough in battle, temporarily of course, or simply running away in the overworld. As for trainer battles, the ones in the battle zone have a proper transition, actually 3 different variants. One from simply being detected normally, starting the battle on a fairground, one from you initiating a foe without being detected before impact, one that actually can knock out a foe right off rip at that, alongside the third odd entry that begins with you being ambushed, dealt with several seconds of just not being able to act. The issue with this entry is just how inconsistent it is. It's not as simple as a foe sneaking up on you, as it can sometimes just happen seemingly at random in a practicality sense, whether they simply see you, potentially even making eye contact, or if one of your mons is just about to strike. You just get handicapped for what simply lacks any form of logic. Once in battle, however, it can end 4 ways. Winning or losing, obviously, fleeing the battle through your trainer movement, or from hitting the forfeit button, which doesn't really come at too much of a cost, only losing out on challenge medals, a warp back to the Pokemon Center, and the game simply getting snarky with you. Lastly, that leaves the regular trainers bound to plot and side quests, entered from simply talking with them or from text prior. Victory and defeat are the only ways out. The difference though, very clear lines in which the battle arena takes place for its invisible walls to host you in. Yeah, that's all for getting us in and out of battle, and we haven't even looked at what we have in there yet. So first, the basics with attacking, cooldowns, and movement. Where we've already locked on to use attacks as the game's most basic aspect, what's actually here? Well, we can start with the stats, as instead of power, accuracy, and PP being our attack stats, with invisible wind up and wind down times, PP essentially gets replaced with cooldown time, which just serves as a time-based delay in which attacks can be performed again, while you either use the rest of your attacks, or you wander around waiting for the time to end. The removal of accuracy, on the other hand, is a bit iffy, as instead of percentage chances to land attacks, now the damage is tied to the hitboxes of the attacks themselves in action, meaning there's an actual degree of skill here. Kind of. Since theoretically this means Pokemon can dodge attacks through good movement, should the Pokemon be easily controllable. Unfortunately, it's one of those easier said than done scenarios, because in battle, your Pokemon will essentially try to walk with your trainer essentially tethered to their side, not directly controlled by you, but influenced, specifically when you're not not busy attacking, so when you want to avoid damage entirely, attacking's not really an option, and with how many attacks have fast startups or just generally not plausible to dodge, it makes the cases in which you try to avoid attacks far less frequent than they need to be, heavily incentivizing the use of using Protect, waiting for foes' attacks just for you to switch out, or simply just waiting to Mega Evolve as if any of these pieces of attack will stop the foe's spam of attacks from coming. Not to mention how attacks themselves have different ranges that can make them a bit awkward to use. This will lead special attackers on average to having a bit of a bad time, as a noticeable chunk of special attacks will have a tax to pay when used called moving to a position adjacent to the trainer before attacking, meaning they just give the foe free time to wail on them or set up for free while being the opposite of spammable. In contrast, the other special moves being in melee range makes the attacks both faster to use in combo, whereas physical attackers just have a far greater supply of melee moves to work with. With all this positioning and cooldown nonsense, it does do something pretty nice, giving good use cases to attacks that otherwise wouldn't see use. From low cooldown moves with lower power to attacks previously held back by forfeiting turns or being freed from the hell of accuracy as a system. Movesets feel easier than ever to fill out, although when you stick it all in the pot and spin it around, this ends up leading PvE play to devolve to just spamming your cooldowns as fast as possible, since avoiding attacks isn't really reliable, whereas strategy is only going to exist in PvP play. Attacks working as they do actually end up coming with another downside, as alpha Pokemon get it rough in terms of viability, because you'll want smaller hurt boxes in order to dodge attacks easier, and being larger doesn't quite make that easy, which if that was all, alphas being used would be foolish enough already. But considering certain mons, not to name Scolipede in particular, have an issue where the extra size can cause them to whiff attacks they otherwise wouldn't as salt in the wound. With the basics finally out of the way, what other intricacies does the battle system provide this time? Well, for a start, we need an obligatory battle gimmick. So to get to the new, we gotta retread the old with the return of Mega Evolution. Items as a whole have been culled down quite a bit in supply and strategies they can enable, so needing the item slot in order to access Mega Evolution in the first place simply has far less opportunity cost, as if that matters when Megas are even stronger this time around. Activation this time comes at a simple button press when the Mega Gauge at the bottom is filled, gaining that Mega Energy as you attack foes, with the Mega Evolution now expiring once the gauge depletes, putting your massive spike in power on a timer that would be paused should the Pokemon leave battle, while the countdown itself getting halted should that Mega Mon faint in the first place, retaining the gauge to prep your next Mega, which technically even allows more than one to be used in a battle. So as if the stat boosts and potential type changes weren't big enough boosts already, the new thing that enables them to be a little overtuned comes to the new battle gimmick with plus moves. The name of the mechanic is actually pretty self-explanatory here. Costing a fourth of the total Mega Gauge and the time spent clicking the plus button, your attack will come out enhanced in various ways, such as more power in attacking moves, extended duration of boosting moves, and in some cases even cutting out on charge time as many means to make your attacks better. Also bypassing Protect if you need it. Although using them isn't so simple, since as a Pokemon Legend staple, using these special attacks will need them to be mastered first from level up or the use of a side feature. Although of course, there's a catch, since Megas will have all of their attacks, unlocked or not, overridden to be plus moves to spam the daylights out of them. What this does is take a feature intended to help regular Pokemon catch up in value to Mega Evolutions to these power boosts, not actually do that, due to how hefty the cost of these attacks are in the first place, especially when Megas can only use plus moves. This power gap is simply not made up for, especially when Megas have much more uptime on them. And in fact, this causes a new issue, cannibalizing the pool of worthwhile Pokemon and items to use across the game with a great divide and strain that simply ignores the demand for Mega Evolution being much greater in this game, although it's stuff we've got to get to later. Circling back to items, good lord, they are overtuned in this game. No, not the held ones. Yeah, if you thought priority-based healing or stat boosting was already insane in the main games, imagine the horror that would come from using them without it eating a turn. Yeah, while that sounds completely overtuned, and frankly it is, there's a bit of a balancing act present. In normal gameplay sections, you can spam items to your heart's content. In contrast, whenever you're in any kind of wild battle, a large chunk of your items and options are unavailable. Now, in that scene, and more importantly, trainer battles too, you can only use one item at a time. Now with time gating, through a timer, with the next item available when the timer finally counts down, all in a menu where the real-time game is actually paused, and the items are instant in use, creating an environment in PvE play where it, at least in a gameplay sense, quite literally is always optimal to spam healing items the second they come off cooldown, and in circumstances, even encouraging running away from foes as a stalling tactic, only held back by one bewildering quirk. As for some reason, in settings where you fight alongside AI companions, if an ally manages to faint for some reason during the time it takes for them to put in a new ally, gameplay, you're just locked out of using the pause menu entirely. That means that you can't really control as a bit of a nerf to the feature. No, you're not doing anything wrong in these gameplay sections, your AI partner is just being stupid. This is an intended gameplay mechanic. So to close up the main battling mechanics sections, we got two things left. First is weather. Not only can you not set it manually in this game, the gameplay effects provided are absolutely pathetic and hardly worth mentioning. Although for impact, one of the biggest changes this game provides is to status conditions, and not for the best. Due to the game being in real time rather than turn-based, obviously things had to change. Out of the 6 status conditions, 3 of them are pretty bad and really not worth seeking out just at all. Confusion is almost useless, as it just messes with the Pokemon's regular movements. Paralysis cutting out on movement speed leaves a Mon a bit defenseless if they need to move, but if they're spamming attacks, the impact will be very minimal. And Drowsy, completely reworked from Legends Arceus, only ends up increasing the cooldown of affected Mon's attacks, which you should be spamming all of anyways. These are the ones that lack gameplay impact, and probably should be avoided. Poison and Burn run similarly to their core gameplay selves, but their passive damage happens over time, as there aren't any turns to tie them to. Where finally, Freeze is just bonkers, just simply preventing the affected Pokemon from playing the game for many seconds at a time, being something actively worth fishing for. Something the other status conditions sadly lack. Gameplay impact, being the biggest fumble of this entire section. They're just not very good at it. Although, getting onto a completely unrelated topic, something with pretty good gameplay impact would be how learning attacks is handled. As a Pokemon Legends classic, attacks are not prompted to be learned when available, and will always need to be pulled from the Mon's moveset menu. The only things worth noting about the menu in this game is TMs being in their own section, so teaching them is just far more convenient without any extra menuing, and simply put, teaching moves is just really fast as there's no unnecessary text to sit through. So you just get in and out at speeds that can actually justify swapping moves out on the fly if you really wanted to. But for other good changes, what if I told you something completely revolutionary? A fix to one of Legends Arceus' biggest issues, and it's to the EXP system. Okay, so get this. When you knock out an enemy Pokemon, your Pokemon actually gets the experience immediately rather than waiting for the battle to end, potentially losing EXP they were supposed to earn. Yeah, this insanely basic concept shouldn't be a big deal, but hey, it's another failure of Legends Arceus that ZA was given a free win on, as a pretty big tool that gets to help this game's level curve later. For some more standardization with the normal games in the series, ZA walks back some of the more unique Pokemon traits Arceus did differently. Both the EV and IV system are actually a return to what the traditional games have. EVs with their 510 invisible numbers to be distributed out as bonus stats, and IVs that are actually present as a feature in this game. This time in an environment where having 0 on stats isn't quite optimal, as there's not really any scenarios where you'd want them to be lower in the first place, meaning a higher number is always better, one that you can always force to be there. An outcome mostly made whole due to the rework to the speed stat, simply making your cooldowns faster the higher the number is. Lastly, abilities for the most part just don't exist, but of course there are a few exceptions. Some previous huge and pure power holders just have buffed attack stats, filling in for their lack of an ability. Zygarde actually does get to keep Power Construct to access its complete form, even featuring an extra trait that changes one of its attacks after Mega Evolving. And finally, the Regigigas of this game. Yeah, not only is a departure from a turn-based battle system terrible news for Aegislash, but the time spent per stance change in a cooldown spamming environment really helps to bury the Pokemon entirely, with its gimmick being a hindrance. Alright, who wants to talk about shiny Pokemon? Because of course there's something new here. Because as if the shiny Sparkle having its sound return wasn't soft enough already, well now the game allows you to get a new option to just ignore shinies entirely. As now, when they spawn, you can just leave them be, and even make them despawn. But when you return, they'll still await you, since now the game will store the 10 most recent shinies you've spawned in, but not yet battled, in the overworld, just for you to come back and claim them at a later time. Presumably after you've bought some Pokeballs or something. Being incredibly soft, as now, you don't have to be prepared, you can just be prepared later. And lastly, for the raw gameplay, we've got the almost redemption arc of Legends Arceus' noble Pokemon with the Rogue Mega Evolutions. Once again, being battles against a massive foe with a big ol' health bar, where the main challenge is just keeping the trainer alive from the onslaught. In contrast to Arceus, there's a lot more fights in this game, all of which have better moveset variety to boot. But the big revolutionary change that redeems the feature is just how you do battle in the first place, because instead of just throwing nonsense, basically like their Pokeballs at the boss, with battling them being a slower optional alternative not even worth partaking in, this time, you dealing damage is mandatory to progress the fight, since damage with the Pokemon Pokemon is the only way to do damage. It means you actually have to engage with the enemy Pokemon on a fundamental level that goes past simply bobbing and weaving, since now your Pokemon are a valuable resource. Not to mention how locking on can potentially screw you out of being able to dodge attacks. Other than the basics, there are two things that are special here. The first being your ability to actually take your Mon off the field, creating a new level of defensive play called, hey, stop running into attacks and dying for no reason. The second unique trait is just the ability to lose and still keep some of your progress if you choose. You know, just in case the actual challenging part of the game is a bit too much. You know, it's not new or anything, it's just a very important note to have, which is where things end. That is all of what the battle system provides. Here we've got a new battling system that capitalizes on the trainer's involvement in battle, and the Mons battling one another feels fine despite frequently discouraging strategic gameplay. They have the fixing of noble Pokemon and so much more that would be too much to reminisce on. So let's just plug this new battling system into the game's experience and see how well it holds the game together. And finally, with us starting the playthrough, things here are like sticking a cake in a bomb in a box and shaking it relentlessly, simultaneously packing good building blocks in terms of team building and hurdles in a sense to play through. So let's get the good out of the way first with the team building factors. Opening that can of worms, we lock right in with the Pokedex. 227 unique Pokemon are up for grabs throughout the game's main story, with 4 regional variants accessible, where yes, all 18 typings have good variety to pull from. When the postgame finally rolls over, 3 more become obtainable, with yet one other RV to boot for 230 unique Pokemon in the game for obtainables. Where lastly, we have the transfer-only Dexit survivors in the back with 4 more familiar faces and 3 more rental campers for 234 unique Pokemon and 8 shared Pokedex slots to use forever should the Pokemon home reigns get taken off. While the big number is a bit below average, it works well enough for use, even reinforced by its own Achilles heel. The weakness here comes to trait evolution. So yeah, remember how Legends Arceus gave us an item that basically converted these into stone evolutions but left trading as an option? Yeah, not only is that option gone, the return of held items even unstone evolutions your other items that made the trade evolutions work in that game in the first place. This little change once again makes trade evolutions one hell of a hurdle to jump over in terms of availability. Once again, demanding you know people with the game, or you shell out over $550 to buy another system and the exact same game again just to get your hands on the otherwise impossible to get mons like the Galarian Slow Twins or a Slurpuff. Well, that's our heal. So what's this iron leg we're supposed to be looking at that's so strong? Well, it's actually the availability of Mega Evolutions, believe it or not. Previous games have fumbled a lot in giving you Megas, both to use and to fight. Let's Go gives 4 and fights 1 in the main story. X and Y only ever gave you access to 6, ignoring the second starter shenanigans, with only 3 battleable in the main game. Or S took a big leap with loads of Mega Stones available, yet normal play only allows you to use 23 of these while fighting 4 through the credits. Meanwhile, the Alola games just had the feature entirely post-game locked. Here though, good lord, 58 of these are obtainable during your main story run, with 60 obtainable during normal gameplay. And as for battles, we're gonna ignore 3 entire sections here, ignoring the rogue mega fights, potential megas in the ZA Royale, and the endgame sections. You still duel 15 unique megas over the game's runtime, while still ignoring even repeat fights. Between nearly all the megas being usable in the main game, and there being so many for you to fight, their presence has truly never felt better. Hell, even customizing the Pokemon in this game is pretty good. Not only have we already been over the fact that TMs are fast to use now, but they're unlimited in use once again. EVs have never been as cheap to reset, since an NPC will wipe them for a measly 5 Mega Shards to respec your Mons. Mints are readily available for purchase, removing natures from being an issue. That is, if you can even find the stall selling them in the first place, since they're kind of just all over the place. Personally, I would just recommend this spot since the attack and special attack boosting mints are here, the most frequently useful of the batch. Hell, even the plus move mastery feature rolls in, and reusing the Seeds of Mastery to give your attacks access to their plus variants that you'll almost certainly never use, although having the option for the TM taught attacks to use their plus variants is something you'll really never want to say no to. Which lastly just leaves Hyper Training, where like with Scarlet and Violet, the feature fixes stats from level 50 onward. The issue though is just how inaccessible bottle caps are. While you can get a few in some areas of the game, the farmable method for getting them just requires potentially multiple lengthy runs of a post-game feature just to have the chance of luck suck to get more, hurting what was almost a clean sweep in inclusions to improve your mon's performance. But of course, gamers, it's time for the U word. Unfortunately, that means it's time for the game's playthrough and the general gameplay loop that's surely bound for the moon. But of course, starting the game, we're thrown at tutorials. In fact, so many that it's actually kind of impossible to draw a proper line in the sand on where they end. So I'm making the executive decision on this, and that'll be after the mandatory side quests, despite more later. So from start to there's several proper tutorial battles, the first 3 wild zones, the Pokedex breakables, the first ZA Royale round, and a lot of just holding forward. No, you're not allowed to stray from the path at all before the more open-endedness finally starts. For a few mandatory side quests for about an hour and a half of gameplay, and just for the tutorial stuff before finally hitting its proper gameplay loop for the first third of the game, where you just do your ZA Royale run, the promotion match, and potentially a small story quest for 3 cycles before you get introduced to the Rogue Megas, and finally unlock Mega Evolution as a feature, where you get one more battle zone loop to reach what cycle takes us to the endgame. Understand this loop is roughly 4 hours of game time for 5 proper rank increases. This next loop though just hurts, as every bit littered necessitates that you do a wave of 3 Rogue Megas with freedom of choice regarding their order, followed by both the battle zone grind needed for the promotion match and for some reason needlessly bloated story plot serving as filler to earn yourself the privilege of the promotion match in the first place, previously not needed at all, because in these new cases we would have already had done the story content. All of this we have to run 5 entire times before we have our final push. But the catch, this stretch is about roughly, in normal gameplay speeds, 8+ hours, because so far this has been with no consideration for just simply running around to catch things or taking side quests. All the optional stuff that you might want to consider doing, which is everywhere so far. The endgame thankfully has reliable pacing, since it's just a content funnel for roughly 50 minutes to an hour of cutscenes, 1 normal battle, 1 whatever this thing is, and 6 waves of random Mega Pokemon to mash your thumbs off for minutes at a time. So now that you've seen the actual substance of the gameplay, what's actually playing through it like? Well, unfortunately again, it sets the gold standard for repetitive gameplay and makes the game's Pokedex look like it's nowhere near enough somehow. So to start, we divide the game into its 2 sections. The climb from the start of the game through your funny super comedical rank jump that skips what could have been more content, covering ranks Z through V, then the other half of this jump all the way towards the last shred of proper main game content, covering ranks F all the way through A. The first third of the game is fine for the most part, as we're delivered 16 regular trainer battles, 1 Rogue Mega to fight, and loads of tutorialized nonsense to cover. Since the battle zones can vary in how many trainers you end up fighting, courtesy of the challenge cards, we've gotta make a compromise on what the numbers are gonna look like. So I'm giving you the numbers of the max amount of trainers you can fight to cap score, and the average what a normal playthrough may put you against. The average I managed in gameplay being around 34 battles, where the max needed to progress, if my ability to do simple math is accurate, 45 randomly selected trainers to duke it out with. Okay, honestly, that's not too bad. So why am I delivering you issues of repetition? Why are you hearing this? Well, unfortunately, the downhill spiral starts after getting Mega Evolution, and the premature jump to the second 2/3 of the game, which remember, in playtime is over double what we've played already so far. Yes, ignoring endgame. This bloated stretch of gameplay time includes the 31 regular trainer battles, which is fine, 15 Rogue Megas to fight over the span of several minutes, almost like the supply of Arceus' noble Pokemon wasn't actually the problem, but the associated gameplay was. They just ignored that fact. So we have them spammed in small doses that happen way too much over the course of the game. But that is nothing compared to what the battle zones provide. In the sense of an average playthrough, the battles I hit in part 2 were 88, saved by the battle cards. However, without them, alongside the score from the lowest scoring trainers each rank actually provides, we get to creep up to a number that is a microscopic, measly 138. This number is nothing short of taxing, and the real reason the game devolves into button mashing. That's just simply to speed up this game because it's the most repetitive part of the entire experience. Add all the trainer battles together from both parts, and it's a little over 230, thankfully with shortcuts available. Shortcuts or not though, this game is suffering from the opposite issue Legends Arceus had. With that game having way too few battles, it ended up making team building feel like a complete waste. Here though, there's simply just too many battles. While our main trainer supply is fine and generally about the expected result for mandatory content, the battle zones reaching 183 battles that reach levels that 3 to 4 whole other Pokemon games can't reach combined for mandatory content. It's just obscene. Combine that with the sheer amount of battles you'd have to do, and this game's Pokedex really just isn't cutting it. We go from pitifully paced story beats to the spam of rogue megas, which are fine in a vacuum, but the fact you're fighting 3 per wave where the gameplay goes on for far too long, should you not have a mega on standby, which on its own is already altering the course of team building, is a lot. Combine that with the story review we'll get to later, leaves the game to be exhausting and uninteresting to play through at a regular pace or especially a fast one. But gamers, sometimes you need a fast pace, which was the crutch of the footage you see today. As here, I wanted to dispel some misinformation going on regarding this game, and it's simply the idea of the level curve keeping you over leveled even when you ignore all of the game's content. And from start to finish, the conclusion I found is the fact that this might actually be the best level curve in the entire series, full stop. The real hurdles come when it's time to add new mons to your team. Simply put, most of the wild encounters have a bit of an underleveled issue to varying extents. Sometimes the gap is 5 levels, sometimes they're not underleveled, and sometimes it's just tough. Or it would be if using those mons during your mandatory grinding sessions didn't make up for the gaps fairly quickly. If that's somehow not enough, not only can candies be farmed pretty easily, you actually get some every so often for just doing nothing if you really need them. And that's just to keep up with the XP curve. Actually getting ahead to over level usually lies in doing the rank's mandatory run of the battle zone. The question of, are you doing it before or after the story plot? Doing it before can of course lead to some over leveling issues, where delaying it won't. Regardless, the rank up fight will almost undoubtedly have you on par with the boss every damn time. Although, understand that's just looking at the main battles. The battle zone, especially in the first third of the game, in most instances will be underleveled unless it's a trainer specifically intended to be higher. While being higher in most circumstances isn't ideal, it's necessary since the XP mechanics will end up giving you less XP when you overlevel your foe, therefore not letting you spiral out of control, so those important story battles can actually keep their impact as harder content that you will be on par with, compared to the content that is supposed to be trivial, helping you get there. Unfortunately though, that's only one way to play the game. Typically, how most repeat runs will look. For first timers, however, where you actually want to seek out the game's content with all the side quests and wild mons that you'd want to engage with, yeah, overleveling's a bit more inevitable. But hey, optional content does that, and unlike the more traditional games, you can't really dodge optional trainers here. Also, the post-game being as short as it is, ends up causing issues where of course Lysander's gonna have a pretty big level jump when you get to him. Oh look, one issue. So, to bring it all back, the game boasts a decent Pokemon variety, shackled by the mind-bending amounts of trainer battles the game will have you partake in. Thankfully, with just about every Mega Evolution available during the main game, packed by a good variety of features to make customizing your mons even easier, completely strangled by the main game experience your team will have to dismantle, regardless of how mind-numbing the thing is. Thankfully, backed by one of the best level curves the series has to offer. With yet another modern Pokemon game, it's time for an absolutely limited supply of side content that feels way more empty than it actually is. Popping that bottle's cap off starts with side quests, obviously being optional missions of varying conditions to make the world feel more alive and the such. For an open world type game, this is to be expected, and with over 100 available, you've got a lot to consider but probably won't, as a positive inclusion that should go without saying. But if you want some very thrilling and engaging content, we have the infinite ZA Royale. It's literally just the ZA Royale from the main story, but again, with an even larger score demand. But this time, your challenger ticket is cashed out to fight battles from a random pool after many battles in a set order, with rewards that we've previously addressed as awful. With rare rewards you would actually want, like bottle caps and some rare balls, completely eclipsed by a bunch of filler items that are mostly useless as a middle finger, being the game intentionally trying to waste your time, for a battle facility that feels even more soulless than the battle tower, despite having much more depth. Although the real recycling recycling bin doesn't end there, since the Rogue Megas can actually be rebattled too. With a non-existent reward pool, you can once again rebattle each of the 16 Rogue Megas, but slightly harder and solo if that's going to make you want to do a 20th Rogue Mega fight in the first place. Yeah, post-game actually made 3 of these mandatory just to get a damn bird. But hey, the inclusion is fair and fine. It just makes you wish any of these battles were proper post-game content instead. For some more battling content, technically X and Y's restaurants return, where you can pay a small amount of money to fight 3 trainers. You're never doing this, the battle zone exists for a reason. But gamers, throw all that out, because now we have the most important gameplay change. Since the Pokédex research tasks were undoubtedly one of, if not the worst aspects of Pokemon Legends Arceus, as filler content that did a pitiful job at being mandatory grinding as a feature that honestly could have been fine if it was just side content to opt into. Here they return to a much better reception. The big fix was just not making them mandatory during the main run, using the ZA Royale as a better solution. But if that doesn't do it, the rewards here are simply much better too, featuring loads of unlimited use TMs as rewards for a great incentive to actually work on the quests that most of are just far less restrictive in earning due to being quests in a vacuum rather than being Pokemon specific quests. Although some are absolutely baffling at how they even got greenlighted as roadblocks to the shiny charm in the first place. And finally, for gameplay content, we have a first for the Legends series. Gamers, this game actually has PvP in it, granting us a 4-player environment where players try to go for the most amount of KOs while hoping to not get obliterated themselves, needing to sit through lengthy respawn times that'll get in the way of you needing to tactically plan out an approach so you can get the most KOs and win, in what's basically just the Battle Royale Dome, but different, even featuring a ranked mode. Moving away from the proper gameplay, we have the forgettables, like the game's inclusion of an in-game camera that saves photos to your Switch library so you can swiftly delete them afterwards. Trainer customization returns once again with a give, a take, and a balance keeper. A take with how inaccessible shopping is, as there's simply just way too many shops to hop between to make simple shopping not, but a give in the new hair customization, allowing 2 different colors as options through highlights. Meanwhile, the Peacebringer, unless it's for online discourse, being that all customization options can actually be accessed regardless of your trainer's gender choices, as the great equalizer that stops females from having greater options by putting everything on the table. The Pokeball Collector is yet another new thing in the game. Whether you misclick or you're simply just bad at throwing your Pokeballs, come talk to this guy and he will simply give you the ones that you miss back, with no drawback. Yes, everybody dreamed about missing their Master Ball in Let's Go. Well, congratulations, you can do it here and walk it off consequence-free. Which, yeah, this is probably the second softest change in the entire game following that shiny Pokemon fiasco. And lastly, we've got more gameplay features that you used to be able to enable or disable at your leisure that are now always enabled. For better is the cutscene skip always being enabled, as now simply pressing and holding plus will let you bypass the cutscene to make repeat runs much faster. Although there's no way to skip the avalanche of normal dialogue, so it's not gonna matter too much. Well, it's less new and more of a reintroduction. Although now, it may be hypocritical for me to say this, but listen, I didn't mind Game Freak making the EXP share mandatory, nor the mandatory battle animation, switch mode, and cutscene skip. But gamers, make no mistake, the line has to be drawn somewhere, and mandatory autosave is 8 steps too many. As long as you're not being targeted, simply fetching mons, KOing them, finishing trainer battles, progressing plot, buying items, or even just flying places can and will set off the autosave, almost killing off safe scumming as a strategy entirely, for whatever means you needed them for. And it's not like the save data backup's gonna help you too much here. But most importantly, this causes a new problem, teaching you a bad habit called not saving, because surely the game did, but it actually didn't, as the ultimate evil, rounding out the features in general content, where we were given a barren lineup of side content and several changes that make the game simply stand out. Diving into the immersive aspects of the game, we open with the soundtrack, which is the standard affair for Pokemon. From start to finish, a pretty enjoyable soundtrack quality-wise, unfortunately coming at a cost. This soundtrack is, unfortunately, in the context of playing the game, repetitive. With the world itself, you have 4 main area themes to work with before the small amount of side areas get involved. So, for the main bulk of the game, and especially the end game, you get one single theme shared between each of the wild zones, battle zones, zones, standard day, and standard night sections of gameplay, with zero deviation to make these areas stand out. 20 wild zones, yet the music is all the same. The battle zones are reasonable, but with how many hours are spent on the streets, the fact you've only got one singular track during the main bulk of your time is heinous. No matter how much of a banger the night theme is, it'll be exhausting to hear it every single time the sun goes down. While it helps that the side areas do exist with different music, you do end up spending very little time in these areas in the first place for that gameplay impact to be felt. In contrast, the battle music, which does start a bit repetitive at first, does begin to pick up with all the various forms of nonsense in the second half of the game, helping at least make up a bit in the variety sense for battling. Although something that has no redemption arc, sadly, is the graphics. Look man, this topic has been ripped apart by people for days on end, like a fish being gutted, so I'll just keep it brief. This game somehow managed to not only make snow look bad, the game not only reminded us of how awful the fruit in Three Houses was 6 years ago, but somehow manages to look even worse through clipping very few objects through a PNG. And lastly, the game found a way to make the world scale feel absolutely barren through the lack of detail on many of the game's buildings. It's already one thing when windows and general walls are just flat PNGs, but it gets even worse when it's like structural support and entire sections of railing that are flat because the world just doesn't have depth or immersion. It actually feels like a PS2 game, which is terrible standards enough. But since Scarlet and Violet actually did manage to have scale, you know, windows that sit in a frame, railing, but it actually doesn't stop a window from being openable, it's almost like there's actual architecture in a massive open world game that would love to not have to load all of this in, despite some of its issues. And yes, there's even better looking fruit, making this game look like a complete joke by a game that looks like a complete joke. Although for the sake of fairness, I do have a positive here, and that's just the game being played on Switch 1. The fact this game can hold a steady frame rate and be mostly bug-free is very nice. In my time of playing, I only ever ran into a single issue, which is pretty good. So clearly, things are well. One could only imagine. Sorry, that last clip was so appalling, I'm at a loss of words to even make a proper transition to the story section. Alright, a summary of Legends Arceus' plot at its bare bones goes a bit like this. You are just some kind of tourist coming into Lumio City with too much being unknown. Clearly, whatever you're here for is irrelevant if your bozo rival can just pull you off the street and take you into their group, being a team living in some random hotel owned by the most important character in Kalos history. From here, you get roped into running the ZA Royale in a quest to be number 1. Along the way, you get pulled into helping combat the rogue Mega Evolution epidemic, all while Zygarde tests you along the way. After finally reaching rank A, the secret second ultimate weapon living in Lumio's tower is simply pissed off, so now the third strongest wielder of Mega Evolution goes to stop it and of course fails, where you, with the power of all the friends you made along the way, get to put an end to the big angry tower threatening to wipe out the region a second time thanks to the big green lad, and you end up saving the city. The end. Except for the fact there actually is a post game, which is just you fetching legendaries randomly thrown in town with zero regards for the mandatory catch cannon. Ultimately, the skeleton of the story could work if it was just its own thing, but being a sequel really muddies the water, since the main conflict is based off AZ's construction of the ultimate weapon and the brand new contrived addition of a second machine in the tower that's apparently just supposed to share life, whatever that's supposed to mean, but due to the actual firing of the original weapon, an issue ends up inevitably making the second machine a second ultimate weapon, just because. But if the overall plot was just contrived, that would be one thing, but when things come down to the characters, it's not very good. In terms of complete letdowns, the main cast undoubtedly lives up to the title the most. Out of the main trio, Naveen was the only one with shreds of personality, a shame that was injected with the sole purpose of progressing the plot. Meanwhile, Lita and your rival are about as dry as they come. One is a dancer and nothing else. The other likes their hotel and is convinced they are the best. And that dry pot is just about it, unless you count their terrible goal of finding this very important person. This awesome plotline you've got to run the infinite ZA Royale 15 times to see the conclusion of. Let's just hope this connection wasn't made obvious elsewhere, else I'd feel like a waste of time. Oh wait. The most important characters, even when not dumbed down, are uninteresting, boring, and hardly written. Things improve a bit, thankfully, when moving down towards the characters that probably shouldn't even exist in the first place. You know, the supporting cast. From lows of repeating a character from the most recent game but strictly worse, or of course having a big dumb muscle character, they're not exactly compelling. But their own supporting casts at least make them quite a bit more tolerable. Corbo and his crew is just proof you can't really mess up a mod boss and his subordinates. Jacinth and her maid are at least a bit entertaining, learning through just being overbearing freaks? Which lastly leaves us with the legacy characters. Yes, the ones from the game we actually like. Try detective with nothing else going for her. Try the long line of criminals from the events of 5 years ago, such as the one who's funny whenever she's not harassing you about research progress. Try some of the remnants of Team Flare coming back to realize their goals. They're only 2 people strong, and sadly they only really teach you information that you would have known previously had you paid attention in the original games. And lastly, for relevance, the 2 that hurt the most. To the shock of nobody, Lysander survived the events of X and Y. And now, he's just a shell roaming around the town, fulfilling the will of Zygarde, who's just trying to keep the world in balance. Lysander himself surviving is one thing, creating many avenues to take his character. You know, something like the regret for what he's done. Something X and Y was trying to tell us was something he didn't want to do. Unfortunately, he's the embodiment of wasted potential and what-ifs due to being the victim of an amnesia plotline, which just really serves more as a detail rather than actual character direction. And the icing on top being that yes, due to firing the damn weapon, this husk is also sentenced to 3,000 years of life, basically consequence-free, to live the life of doing positives that he always dreamed of as a heinous parallel to the character that got done the dirtiest in the entire game with AZ. Okay, so let's just take the most important character in all of X and Y, the one with the tragic backstory and the creator of Big Evil Things. Let's put him behind a desk where he can twiddle his thumbs the whole game before letting him drop new lore that never existed before, and your entire inclusion in the plot of becoming the best Mega Evolution holder is only really an event that happens because he lets the strongest Mega Evolution wielder go long before the game starts. It just feels so forced. And the game is done. He does nothing, which makes the post-credits scene after just insulting because he's just dead. There's no build-up, no reason, he's just gone. While it is the logical next step in his atonement, this moment is just completely unearned as nothing happened in terms of character growth. Even in the perspective of all of his sins being put to rest, I mean, kind of. Yeah, the 2 weapons are destroyed, but now we're left with a Pokemon that'll live forever, and a man who's yet to live 3,000 more years. The influence of his selfish actions are still being felt. So like, he really didn't need to go, completely ruining what was actually a perfect character in X and Y. So to recap, a story that would work more as an isolated plot rather than a sequel, and absolutely nothing post-game that shoehorned in the other legendaries as poorly as possible, and a weird character balance where the main cast just sucks, the legacy characters feel like the game rolling dice to see who should and shouldn't be handled well, making a mockery out of the characters you love, meanwhile the side characters that only existed for that one scene of everyone working together, while some are handled well, the trip to get to that point of enjoying them comes after gameplay that only existed to inflate game time for terrible first impressions. Yes, all of them. Completely ran down by a story that overstays its welcome, never getting to the point, Among Us or not. To be as fair as possible, Pokemon Legends ZA hurts, but thankfully is a step forward for the Pokemon Legends sub-series. In a positive sense, our new experimental gameplay system isn't the most miserable thing in the world. Several steps down from the core games, sure, but hey, consistency is something that exists. There is some strategy in when to engage and when to button mash, no matter how overtuned some features are, or how many may be extremely underbaked. The Rogue Megas, despite how many of them are, did take the correct direction for improvement as the big boss type enemy of the game, as this is where all the game's difficulty lies, and just trying to stay alive. Fun fact, this game is extremely easy. The replayability factors, outside of actually playing the game's offering, is decently strong, including the best implementation of Mega Evolution in the series, alongside a level curve that keeps you stressless, without a need to grind almost ever. The ease of attack teaching, and yes, even the research task being optional, is nothing short of amazing. And who would say no to more in-depth trainer customization? Unfortunately, the positives do kind of just stop there, where the negatives open up like floodgates. Starting with an uninteresting world that blends together, the dumbing down of catching mechanics, the pitiful means for you to run around the world at a bit of a slow pace, the constant pausing of the day-night cycle, the battle system that frequently devolves to button mashing and makes half the game's status conditions completely irrelevant, if not beneficial to have, to even that of the sheer amount of battles and irrelevant plot threads that just inflate gameplay time non-stop in very uninteresting ways, to that of the very empty supply of side content, the musical repetition, the graphical infidelity, and most importantly, the fumbling of a story that at times feels like it's supposed to be a love letter to X and Y fans before crumpling that letter up and tossing it out onto an open flame. And gamers, understand, that's just me looking at what the game has, not even what the game's missing as standards for the year of 2025. the many what ifs that can be thrown out, or the disgusting marketing practices. All of it blends together to create the most bland but tolerable game Pokemon has ever printed. We're now, of course, the most fateful moment of the video, reviews. And for the scale of 1 to 5, we will walk in with one of the lowest 3s possible. It's simply one of the most middling games ever made, for better or for worse. And for the simple question of should you play it? Maybe. To put it simply, it's a Pokemon Legends game. This already doomed it to being a game that's impossible to recommend to a generalized audience, or even ones that just prefer the games be better. Only really worth recommending to those who fiend open world-esque games, and the ones that soy out the second they see a Pikachu. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is thankfully where I get to stop being reasonable. Because of course it's time for my personalized recommendation, and all I've got to say is run! As this game is nothing short of mediocrity, from start to finish, the 2 runs this game could not save it from being the most boring mainline game to date. From the dud of a plot that did the characters you cared about dirty, or the gameplay that's supposed to end and keeps finding new ways to keep going, this game was nothing short of taxing to play through. Outside of that one bug from earlier, the only time I ever had enjoyment was once in the entire game. Just that moment when Frostlass had the icicles drop before going for its wipe attack. I looked at it for a second and internally thought to myself, my god, it's like the Horizon Track Easter egg! Yeah, enjoyment of this game coming from thinking about a different one entirely sure as hell isn't a good sign. And yes, I'll say it, gamers, this game does feel like the embodiment of the Fell for It Again award. But hey, the most important part of this game for me was whether or not this game would be better than Legends Arceus. And lucky me, some lessons were learned leading to the game to be so, despite the 500-degree burn this game tries to give. In a personal sense, that burn was so foul I delusionally thought for a second that I'd prefer Legends Arceus because how mind-numbing this whole ordeal was alongside the idea of love through hate. Then I went and played it for about 30 minutes for footage, realizing how outlandishly stupid that thought was. Not to pretend that I don't regret both playing, but most importantly, buying ZA. That's still something I wouldn't budge on. Hell, we even had a cut section where I was supposed to set up a GoFundMe so you could hopefully right my wrong with a pseudo refund, especially as a digital purchase can't be undone as an idea. But now it's not even worth pandering to either side of the internet discourse that makes this game so obnoxious to talk about. I just wanted to let the internet know what this game is truly like, without the need to go on entire rants about how stupid both sides of the ZA argument are. Like, yes, the game, even past titles, would benefit from voice acting as a net positive, good or bad. No, harassing people for enjoying something is in fact subhuman behavior. Meanwhile, your criticism that only just now became relevant just feels like somebody screaming for attention. Like, where were you when the games were worse? Seriously. Like, Legends Arceus happened, BDSP and Scarlet and Violet released as buggy messes. Why weren't you complaining sooner? Yeah, this new wave of Nintendo hate is nothing short of nonsense, and you can see how stupid it is. The Switch 2 never needed to release for Nintendo criticism to be a problem. It's all just a farce, which is where I'll end things. Yep, that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and until next time! If you found this video useful, just consider dropping a donation or a super thanks, I guess. I don't know, man. I don't think I can really justify funding a video for the DLC when I already feel this insulted from playing the base game in the first place. Any help will assist in curbing that mentality. I don't know, man. This game just feels like a fever dream.